Why did their laughter bother her less than the silence that would follow? The first guard's chuckle wasn't what stung. It was the certainty in his eyes. He'd already decided who she was before she even spoke. Jeans, scuffed shoes, no insignia, no entourage. To them, she was noise at the wrong door. She could feel their judgment like heat on her back, but she stood still, shoulders relaxed, breathing even, saying nothing as the cold morning air curled through the hills around Fort Crestwood. Sarah Mitchell didn't fidget, didn't glance around, didn't ask if someone else could assist her. The faded jacket she wore looked borrowed from another life, the kind worn by people who waited in bus stations, not those who walked into military strongholds. In her palm rested the black card, matte, old, unnumbered, unremarkable until light caught the faint emblem that pulsed like a restrained heartbeat. The guards never saw the pulse. They saw a joke. One of them, barely old enough to buy his own beer, leaned forward with that expectant grin soldiers wear when they think they've discovered a story to tell later. His name tag flashed Jenkins when he shifted. He eyed her like someone testing the boundary of boredom. She could almost predict his lines before he spoke them. "You lost, ma'am. This isn't the visitor's center." His tone carried that casual disrespect, nothing overt, nothing that could be punished, just enough to push. She didn't reply. She simply extended the card a little closer to the scanner. It was the quietest rebellion she allowed herself. Private Jenkins looked back at his buddy Diaz, who was already laughing before anything happened. He snatched the card from Sarah's hand with the easy confidence of someone certain they couldn't be wrong. "I'll scan your library card, sure," he said, winking at Diaz. When he tapped it to the reader, the scanner's purple light exploded into recognition so fast the laughter died mid-breath. A siren didn't wail, something worse did. A flat tone, unnatural and cold, vibrated from the tower speaker above the gate. "Override level, Zeta. Welcome, Commander Mitchell." The base lights dimmed for a fraction of a second as system priority rerouted. One of the guards swore under his breath. Another stepped back like the card might burn him. Jenkins dropped it. For a second, nobody moved. But Sarah didn't look smug, didn't gloat, didn't even look at them. She watched the gate's reinforced doors slide open with machine precision. The world shifted, and yet she remained exactly where she was. The silence that followed wasn't reverence. It was discomfort. Their laughter dissolved into the kind of quiet that always arrives too late. She could feel the weight of their confusion pressing against the air. But then, as expected, pride spoke louder than fear. "Nice prank," Jenkins muttered, recovering his voice though it came out thinner. He bent down, grabbed the card awkwardly and threw it at her chest. It slid down her jacket and hit gravel. "Pick it up, princess." There it was, the need to reassert themselves, to pretend the last few seconds meant nothing. Sarah bent slowly, gathering the card between two fingers. No rush, no tremble. She brushed a fleck of dirt from it with her thumb, her expression unreadable. "You done," she said quietly. It wasn't a threat, not even anger, just a sentence placed gently on the table. Jenkins broke eye contact first. She stepped through the threshold only after they reluctantly moved aside. The air changed temperature past the gate. Inside the base perimeter, every detail was familiar in a way that felt borrowed from memory. Vehicles aligned with mechanical precision, the distant thump of helicopters rotating on standby, the smell of fuel and dust mixing with morning chill. But she could already feel eyes on her. That instinct wasn't something you lost. She didn't make it 50 steps before everything caught up. Captain Peterson arrived in a storm of pressed uniform and flaring ego, his boots thundering on the concrete like the ground owed him sound. His jaw was tight, his voice built to dominate rooms. "What the hell is going on?" he barked at the guards before even looking at her. Rough authority, too loud to be confident. Jenkins stammered something about unauthorized access. Peterson waved him off and turned his attention fully to Sarah. His eyes filled with quick assessment, then faster dismissal. "You think you can crash my bases system and stroll in, restrain her?" She could have spoken then. She didn't. She let the cuffs close around her wrists, the metal cold against skin already marked by older scars. Peterson looked satisfied, not because he was right, but because he was certain. As they walked her through the base, she remained still, breathing steady, eyes forward. But the jeers started before they cleared the first building. It always started that way. Some people mocked out of ignorance. Others mocked to silence their own suspicion. "Fake soldier," one murmured loud enough to be heard. Another nudged his buddy and laughed at her sneakers. A soldier named Malone saw an opportunity to perform. He strutted forward, plucked her canvas bag from the escort's grip, and tossed it into a muddy ditch without breaking stride. Laughter followed. He expected a reaction. Sarah gave him none. She paused only long enough to say, "That bag's worth more than your mouth." A few snorted. Malone's smirk twitched. Inside the holding room, the lights flickered overhead like they didn't trust their own wiring. The walls were bare concrete, the air recycled, the chair in the center still cold from whoever sat there last. They didn't uncuff her, didn't offer water, didn't ask questions. Specialist Larson sat at a terminal, frowning at the unresponsive system. Ruiz leaned in the corner, arms crossed, her stare sharp and smug. "She probably lifted that card off a real officer," Ruiz said, not bothering to lower her voice. Larson tapped a few more keys. "The system's frozen." Peterson scoffed, "Fix it." Then the red phone rang, the one they pretended didn't exist. Peterson answered with stiff irritation, but the voice on the other end carved the room in two. "Did you just handcuff Sarah Mitchell?" It wasn't a question. It was a thunderclap wearing the name of General Crowley. Peterson went pale. "Sir, we remove the restraints now." Nobody moved at first. Ruiz fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly the cuffs rattled. Sarah stood once they unlocked, rubbing her wrists only long enough to bring blood back to the surface. "I don't need apologies," she said when Peterson tried. "I need cooperation." She walked out without waiting for dismissal, her canvas bag retrieved from the gravel by a soldier who couldn't look her in the eye. The guards didn't speak as she passed. They simply stepped away like instinct commanded them. The operations building's corridor stretched long and sterile, lined with framed photos of medals and men who once believed they couldn't be replaced. The fluorescent lights hummed their dull hymn, footsteps echoing in a rhythm her pulse refused to match. Her card clicked into place on her jacket. The emblem shimmered like it remembered things she tried to forget. But she didn't even make it to the main hall before another challenge found her. Lieutenant Gorman, clipboard in hand and ego just barely contained by his uniform, blocked her path. He'd heard enough rumors in 1 hour to think he understood the situation. "So you're the reason everyone's losing their minds," he said, voice loud enough to draw attention. He plucked the card from her jacket like it was a sticker. "This thing looks like a kid's toy. You expect us to salute it." He tossed it into a trash bin. People laughed. Someone clapped. Sarah looked at the bin, then at him. "Pick it up." 2 words, level, unraised, but his smile faltered. Something behind her eyes made his chest tighten. He turned away without retrieving it, as if walking off made him untouchable. She retrieved it herself, wiping the dust from its surface before reattaching it to her jacket. Her heartbeat never shifted pace. When she stepped into the operations room, the change in atmosphere was instant. Officers paused mid-sentence. The screens reflected shifting data streams. Boots stilled on tile. Lieutenant Colonel Doyle spotted her first. His face hardened with memories that had teeth. "You," he said, voice sharp enough to cut silence, "you're the reason my team died." He slapped a report onto the table, the pages scattering like accusations. "Mitchell, the lone survivor of Dragon Eye," he added, each word dipped in venom. A younger officer snorted, probably just hid behind the front line. Doyle tipped a glass of water over her documents. Harris laughed like cruelty made him taller. Sarah watched the ink bleed through the paper, her fingers tightening once, then releasing. "You finished?" she asked softly. No one answered, but the air changed shape. She stepped past them and placed her hand on the biometric scanner. Screens flared to life, not in protest but recognition. A 3D map appeared, units marked with red lines, statuses set to terminated. The room leaned forward collectively, eyes drawn to the pulsing data route she isolated. "This was sabotage," she said. The map zoomed in on offshore accounts timestamped to the second their mission failed. The evidence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I wasn't the only survivor," she added. "I was the only one who didn't betray us." Doyle's face lost color. She didn't stay to watch the regret take root. She stepped back, collected the soggy remains of her papers, and let the silence follow her like a shadow. No applause, no vindication, just a shifting gravity that bent the room around her without noise. And still, there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did silence always follow truth more violently than accusation? The room behind her was still holding its breath as she stepped into the corridor, the map's glow fading from the screens but not their memories. She didn't rush. The hallway felt longer this time, not because of hesitation, but because every pair of unseen eyes along the walls had finally started to notice the woman they'd tried to dismiss. Her canvas bag bumped softly against her hip, still damp along the edge where the mud had dried into the fabric. The faded black card rested against her jacket like it was part of her pulse. She could still hear Doyle's voice echo faintly. Anger, fear, regret tangled in a tone that once would have cut her down. Not anymore. She passed a row of glass panels revealing adjacent rooms. Analysts bent over terminals, officers trading clipped words, tech teams trying to look busy without knowing why. Some glanced up when she passed. Most pretended not to. She learned long ago that curiosity made less noise than respect. Before she reached the stairwell, the first apology attempt materialized. Lieutenant Harris trailed after her, his boots tapping too loudly on the polished floor. The same man who had smirked while Doyle drowned her documents now struggled to steady his voice. "Ma'am," he said, breath catching as though the word didn't belong to his mouth. I didn't know who you were." Sarah didn't stop, she didn't even slow down. Harris jogged a step to keep up. "I mean it," he whispered, his tone softer now that no one could see. "If I'd known." She finally paused at the landing, turning only enough for him to see how little weight his words carried. "Knowing doesn't change who you were a minute ago," she said. He tried a smile, small and unsure, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder like he'd earned that right. She stepped back, the contact broken before it fully existed. "Start over with yourself," she said, "not with me." The guilt in his eyes wasn't her burden to carry. She left him in the stairwell, his mouth half open, apology unfinished. Downstairs, the mess hall was thinning from the morning rush. Conversations dimmed when she entered, not in reverence but confusion. Faces that once dismissed her now squinted with recognition they didn't want to admit. She moved to an empty table near the far wall, back to the room out of habit, not fear. Her notebook, still bearing traces of dirt and ketchup and torn pages, lay open in front of her. The pen scratched quietly against paper, thin lines, notes, calculations, reminders. Some things she wrote for memory, some to silence the ghosts. She was halfway down a page when she felt the shift of bodies behind her. "So, you're the VIP with the glowing sticker." Sergeant Waller's voice rose above the chatter. She didn't sit. She hovered, flanked by two logistics clerks who fed off her brand of ridicule like dogs on scraps. Waller snatched the notebook before Sarah could close it, flipping through pages she couldn't understand. "What's this, your diary? Writing fan mail to your imaginary general." She dragged the spine across a streak of ketchup on someone's tray, smearing red across the pages. Her posse laughed like they were punching down on a ghost. Sarah took the notebook back without force. She cleaned the page with a napkin, slow and careful, as if preserving something more valuable than ego. "You talk too much for someone with no clearance," she said without raising her eyes. Waller's face twitched before she masked it with another laugh, but it was thinner now. The clerks didn't laugh as loudly either. They walked away, not victorious, just loud. She finished writing the sentence she'd started before they interrupted. Her letters didn't shake. Back upstairs, tension rippled through the operations center like a storm had been forecasted without warning. A helicopter's blades thumped outside, the windows trembling with each rotation. Soldiers lined the main corridor, boots clicking into silence as the Secretary of Defense stepped through the entrance with 2 aides and a sealed dossier. Conversation stopped mid-word. Chairs straightened. Eyes tracked the tall figure in the dark suit as though gravity followed him. Sarah didn't stand. She was already on her feet. He crossed the room without pause, handing the folder directly to her. "Commander Mitchell," he said, his tone steady and sure. "Welcome back." Not a single person failed to hear it. In the corner under guard, Doyle was escorted out by MPs. His limp seemed heavier now. Nobody spoke his name. Sarah opened the dossier without ceremony. The pages were crisp, red-stamped, and full of history that refused to stay buried. She laid them on the command table and took the lead chair. No one told her to. Screens lit up around her, displaying mission parameters, encrypted coordinates, partial manifests. The glow of the black card on her jacket cast a faint reflection on the surface of the table. Colonel Vance, old enough to know things most men pretended didn't exist, leaned into the officer beside him. His whisper wasn't as quiet as he believed. "We threw water in the face of a lion wearing a jean jacket." Sarah heard it. She didn't react. She briefed the room, voice steady, spine straight, no theatrics. Every person in that chamber took notes. Those who had mocked her filled their pages twice as fast, maybe so the shame wouldn't show on their faces. When the meeting ended, no one spoke to her directly, but they no longer spoke around her either. Later that week, during a systems training exercise, she was asked to demonstrate a new encryption protocol. Not because they respected her, because the secretary's presence had rearranged their fear. Captain Lyall, who had never been impressed by anything that didn't benefit him, leaned back in his chair with a smirk built from habit. "This is cute," he said loudly, "but let's be real, you're just reciting someone else's work." He plucked the printed notes from her hand and tore them in half like paper couldn't fight back. Laughter followed, cruel and casual. She knelt to gather the pieces. Nobody expected her to speak. "You just lost your team's secure channel," she said calmly, rising. They laughed again, nervous humor masquerading as confidence. By late afternoon, a system-wide alert froze the base. Secure channel compromised. The tech team traced the breach back to Lyall's unit. His arrogance had been louder than the warning built into the protocol he just mocked. The fallout came swift. Colonel Vance confronted Sarah in the command center, not with shame, but something like respect buried beneath gruffness. "Your code was flawless," he said, placing a fresh set of printed notes on the desk. "You're leading the fix." Lyall was stripped of his command. He exited without speaking, face drained of color. She said nothing. She sat back down and kept working, pen scratching the next solution before they asked for it. But disrespect doesn't die in a day. It hides until it thinks you've forgotten. At the coffee station outside the comms wing, Lieutenant Baxter and his friends spotted her alone. They weren't brave, just loud. "Hey, card girl," Baxter said as he tossed a stack of napkins at her like confetti. One stuck briefly to her shoulder before falling. "Clean up your mess, Commander." They laughed, a childish, insecure noise disguised as camaraderie. She tossed the napkins into the bin without pause. "You're loud for someone with no clearance," she said. He didn't answer. The silence afterward wasn't obedient, it was exposed. In the mess hall that night, she sat across from Captain Reynolds, who carried gossip like a weapon and smiled like it made her untouchable. "You're not one of us," Reynolds said. "You got lucky and hid while real soldiers fought." Sarah set her fork down gently, lifted her gaze with weight, not rage. "Luck doesn't leave scars," she said. The nearby tables pretended not to listen, but forks stopped moving. That night, the secure briefing room was darker than she remembered. A single screen lit the space with a live Pentagon feed. General Crowley's face filled the frame. "Mitchell," he said, "we need your eyes on a new threat, same pattern as Dragon Eye." She placed the card on the scanner. The encrypted file opened in a cascade of classified intercepts and dead code she once read in a bunker with blood on her sleeves. Someone in the room whispered, "She's running the show now." They didn't know how right they were. By morning, the entire base was under classified security review. Sarah was tasked with auditing access logs. During her briefing, Major Stanton stood, loud and theatrical. "This is a waste of time," he said, voice booming. "We don't need a civilian with a shiny card telling us how to do our jobs." He grabbed her report, crumpled it, and shoved it into a shredder. Laughter rippled through the room like static. Sarah didn't argue. She retrieved a second copy from her bag and placed it on the table. "Your logs show unauthorized access," she said. The laughter dimmed, not gone, but scared of becoming real. By dawn, Stanton's team was flagged in a classified memo. General Crowley summoned him to his office. Sarah was there when the consequences were laid bare. "You ignored her," Crowley told Stanton. "Now your team is grounded." He left with his head down. She didn't look up from the page she was writing on. The shift wasn't dramatic. Respect didn't walk in wearing a band uniform. It crept in quietly, through lowered tones, careful questions, glances that lasted a second too long. Baxter tried cornering her near the operations wing, his tone softer than before. "Ma'am, I didn't mean." "Don't," she said flatly, still writing. He left without finishing. During a training drill, Sergeant Malone, the same man who'd thrown her bag in the mud, mocked her from the sidelines. "Going to wave your magic card and win the war." He tossed a manual at her feet without breaking his grin. She picked it up, brushed it off, handed it back. "Your squad's flank is exposed." He stopped laughing before he understood why. Later in the secure server room, the system crashed mid-analysis. Specialist Carter, irritated and arrogant, pointed at her. "You and your fancy card probably fried it." He unplugged her terminal with exaggerated flair. She said nothing, walked to the main console, placed the card on the scanner. The system rebooted instantly. The log read, "Threat neutralized by user Mitchell." Carter couldn't meet her eyes. The team behind him stared like they'd just seen a ghost breathe. But the real shift didn't come from fear. It stepped into the command center 2 days later, when the doors opened without announcement. Her husband didn't need a uniform to command silence. His posture, his stillness, his eyes, people recognized power even when they couldn't name it. Colonel Vance straightened instinctively. Others moved aside without understanding why. Sarah looked at him without surprise. He nodded once. She picked up her canvas bag and joined him. Consequences rolled in behind them like weather. Jenkins was discharged. His mocking photo of her card leaked online, ending his career. Ruiz was demoted, her tongue quieter now that paperwork outlasted her smirk. Malone lost his training post after her flank warning prevented an exercise disaster. Reynolds saw her clearance revoked when her rumors got traced. Doyle faced court-martial. Offshore accounts didn't lie. Sarah didn't track any of them. She walked the base like she always had, quietly, without need for spotlight. Her jacket still creased, her steps still measured, her card still glowing just enough to remind the ground beneath her that it had underestimated the wrong woman. She never asked for respect, but the world had a way of catching up to the truth it tried to ignore. And still, there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did the ones who doubted her always look away first? Every time someone tried to diminish her, they ended up fighting their own reflection more than her silence. The base didn't move around her the way it used to. Hesitation had replaced mockery, and caution had replaced laughter. But respect was slower than regret. It didn't arrive with announcements. It crept in through posture, glances, and the way doors stayed open half a second longer when she approached. Still, whispers didn't vanish overnight. They only lowered their volume. She moved through the East Wing corridor, a stretch lined with old operation plaques and faded commendation photos mounted on walls that smelled faintly of steel and recycled air. The card at her chest pulsed once under the light, not bright, not boastful, just alive in its own quiet way. She reached the secured systems lab where a handful of tech officers were scrambling over cables and terminals, trying to repair what they didn't understand. Someone had triggered a partial lockdown earlier that morning. The wrong access line, the wrong clearance, the wrong assumption. She already knew the pattern. Systems didn't crash by mistake, only people did. She walked in without being announced. The officers inside hesitated when they saw her. They didn't stand, but they stopped moving. Lieutenant Farron, the ranking systems officer on duty, opened his mouth as if to challenge her presence, but the words died when the biometric sensor above the door recognized her before him. The door sealed behind her. "What's the extent?" she asked, not seeking permission, not asking to lead. Farron cleared his throat. "Encrypted channel breach. Someone rerouted an internal node by accident." It was a lie. She could hear it in his pause. She stepped past him toward the console. A private named Ilson flinched from his chair like she was a flame nearing his skin. She placed the black card on the primary input block. The system didn't power up, it obeyed. The screen lit into layered code. She knew better than most people knew their own handwriting. She scanned without reacting. Lines, symbols, fragments of structure that looked harmless until you learned what silence in code meant. "Accident," she said softly, not looking up. Farron shifted his stance. "That's what we assumed, Commander." Assumed, not confirmed. She typed a string with one hand. The feed collapsed into a red highlighted trace, revealing a secondary user, masked under a defunct access group, someone who thought invisibility could be programmed. "Get Colonel Vance," she said. This time no one hesitated. Farron stepped out, his step stiff, his breath short. She remained facing the screen, the card still anchored in the socket. Her reflection in the monitor wasn't what held her attention. It was the pattern under the breach, familiar, angled, deliberate. Someone careful, someone desperate, someone who understood enough to hide but not enough to disappear. Crowley had been right. Dragon Eye wasn't over. Its residue had been waiting, patient and unseen, inside the people who survived it in the wrong way. When Vance entered, he didn't posture. He looked at the feed once, his eyes hardening. "You recognize the pattern?" he asked. "I've seen it," she said. He didn't ask when or where. He didn't need to. Ilson's voice was a shaken thread. "You think someone on base is?" "Thinking isn't your job right now," Vance said. "Not cruel, just necessary." Sarah pulled the card free. The monitor shut itself down, sealing the trace for retrieval in a secure channel. She slid the card back into the clip at her jacket. As she moved toward the exit, Ilson stepped forward without meaning to. "Commander, do we need to stand down?" She didn't slow, not yet. Her boots made no sound on the floor, but the absence of noise followed her. The hallway outside stretched toward the intelligence division, where a brief meeting waited that she hadn't requested but would attend anyway. The walls here were newer, clean paint, digital panels, sealed vents. New funding always followed old failures. As she neared the corner, voices drifted low but sharp enough to pull meaning from shadows. "She's overhyped. All this for a piece of glowing plastic," one man said with a laugh that wanted agreement. A second voice answered, less sure. "You didn't see Crowley's face on that call, and the secretary. She's a fluke, some classified charity case. Watch, once this is over they'll shove her into PR." Sarah stepped into their view before they could finish deciding what she was. The two junior officers froze, their words still hanging in the air between them like dirty laundry. She didn't stop walking, not for them, but her eyes met the first man for a fraction of a second. He looked away. They both did. She rounded the next corner without breaking stride. Inside the briefing room, a map flickered across a wall screen. 3 officers in suits and 2 in combat uniforms stood dispersed, reviewing classified overlays. A major she didn't recognize turned when she entered, then immediately straightened. No one asked why she was there. Her presence no longer needed a reason. The man at the head of the table, an older colonel with silver around his temples and a voice made of gravel, nodded once. "Mitchell," he said, not a greeting, a necessity. She took a seat at the edge of the table. Not at the center. She didn't need the visibility. But every person present shifted just slightly to accommodate an orbit they pretended wasn't happening. The colonel tapped the display. Intercepts indicate renewed movement from the group tied to Dragon Eye's failure. We haven't confirmed active cells, but signals align with old markers. One of our internal analysts flagged it as residual infiltration. Sarah didn't blink. "It's not residual." He paused. "You have a different assessment." She looked at the rotating map. "Someone's already inside your system. I found a masked trace in your encryption net less than 10 minutes ago." No one spoke for a moment. The youngest officer in the room swallowed audibly. The colonel's jaw tightened. "You confirmed the source." "Not yet." The map's glow cast faint shadows on the ceiling. Sarah leaned back slightly, letting the silence measure their discomfort. "But whoever placed it wasn't guessing," she added. One of the officers stepped closer to the display. "You think it's one of ours?" She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The colonel nodded once. "I want full authority granted to lock down the breach and trace the ingress. You'll have eyes and access on every node you need." She stood. "I don't need permission. I need space." He didn't argue. The meeting adjourned without formal closure. As the room dispersed, the youngest officer looked at her like she was a warning wrapped in skin. She left before anyone could ask for reassurance. Outside, the base no longer felt like a place that doubted her, only a place afraid of what she already knew. She didn't go to her assigned quarters. She walked instead to one of the older hangars near the airfield, where the wind carried jet fuel in cold gusts and the sky looked bruised with early clouds. The hangar door was closed, but she didn't need the inside. She stood beside the rusted frame, watching a pair of helicopters lift off from the runway. One of the crew chiefs noticed her and straightened without knowing why. The card at her chest was quiet now, no pulse visible, but its weight stayed steady. She touched the canvas bag at her side, fingers brushing the worn strap. Inside, beneath the battered notebook and a set of sealed files, was a folded photograph she hadn't looked at in months. Not because she'd forgotten, but because remembering required energy she'd been using to keep breathing. Somewhere behind her, boots approached at a respectful distance, not the hesitant shuffle of someone trying to impress her, someone who already understood where to stand. She didn't turn immediately, not until the footsteps stopped. "You're back sooner than I thought," came the quiet voice. She recognized it instantly, calm, low, a voice that carried strength without needing volume. Her husband didn't come closer. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, gaze not on her but on the horizon like he'd been waiting for it to move first. She exhaled once, steady and slow. "Things didn't wait," she said. He gave a faint nod. They never do for you. The wind blew her ponytail across her shoulder, strands catching on the edge of her jacket. She didn't push them back. He finally looked at her, not searching, just seeing. You ready? She didn't answer, not with words, but the slight shift of her stance was enough. He stepped forward and placed something in her hand. A small calm bead, matte gray, barely the size of a coin. You're not the only one who got called in, he said. Her fingers closed around it. It was warm from his palm, familiar in a way that reached deeper than memory. A distant siren wailed from the main compound, not alarm level, but a signal. He glanced back toward the runway. That for you or me? She didn't look away from the sky. Both. Neither of them moved yet. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was built from people who had already survived the same fire. She finally turned, walking back toward the operations building. He followed a step behind, not protecting, not guiding, just walking the same direction. The base watched without pretending not to. As they neared the command wing, her comm buzzed once against her collar. General Crowley's voice, sharp and controlled, came through. Mitchell, debrief in 15, and bring him with you. No title, no explanation. She didn't slow. There were things this base still didn't know. Not about Dragon Eye, not about the people who walked away from it, not about the ones quietly cleaning up what others tried to bury. And there were things she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did the quiet moments always feel more dangerous than the loud ones? The base wasn't roaring with alarms, yet every hallway carried a tension that didn't exist the day before she arrived. It clung to the walls, to the boots shuffling out of her path, to the soldiers pretending not to glance at the black card clipped to her jacket. She and her husband walked side by side toward the command wing. He didn't speak, and she didn't need him to. Their silence wasn't distance, it was language, a kind forged in places where words died under gunfire and truth had to hide beneath breathing. The main doors of the operations building slid open with a hydraulic sigh. The MPs stationed outside glanced at each other but didn't raise a hand to stop either of them. One of them, lean, jaw tight, maybe mid-20s, saluted before he could think twice. She didn't return it, not out of disrespect, but because she never saluted eyes that doubted her the day before. Inside, the corridor to the debriefing room was lined with glass offices and mission boards. Officers walked briskly, but not too close. Some looked at her husband with that guarded recognition, reserved for people whose files didn't exist on public servers. They reached the reinforced door at the end of the hall. A small console beside it lit up with a scanning beam. Her card was already in her fingers before it finished opening. The lock disengaged with a metallic click. General Crowley was standing at the head of the briefing table, not sitting. His hair was shorter than the last time she'd seen him in person. His uniform looked like it had been ironed by a storm. A large display behind him remained dark except for a poolsing emblem marked with classified clearance. Two analysts and a colonel she didn't know stood stiff against the wall. None of them spoke. Crowley's eyes moved from Sarah to the man beside her. Something like acknowledgement passed between them, quiet but old. "You were supposed to stay off-grid," Crowley said to him. Her husband gave the faintest shrug. "You called her, that calls me." Crowley didn't argue. The general looked back at Sarah. "You traced the breach." "I found its entry point," she said. "It's not dormant." Crowley nodded once, then turned to the analyst nearest him. "Leave us." They left fast, relief hidden under urgency. The colonel lingered a half-second too long before exiting. When the door sealed behind them, Crowley spoke again. "The secretary wants you on task immediately, but you already knew that." Sarah didn't respond, and Crowley didn't expect her to. He gestured to the main screen, and the emblem dissolved into a map, continental overlays, communications corridors, satellite feeds trailing digital footprints at the edge of visibility. These signals came online again 3 weeks ago, he said. Low-frequency bursts, encrypted with fragments of decommissioned codes. None of our analysts recognize the signature, but you will. She stepped closer, scanning the map with a stillness that made the entire room feel temporary. One pulse on the map caught her eye, not because of where it was, but because of where it wasn't supposed to be. Someone repurposed the Dragon I Dead channels, she said. They're not sending new signals, they're waking old ones. Crowley glanced at her husband. How many of them could do that? 3, he said, then after a beat, 2, if you count the one still alive. The room swallowed that quietly. Sarah moved her eyes along the grid. The masked trace in your system wasn't a test run, it was a handshake. Crowley's jaw tightened. You think there's a collaboration inside the base? She didn't answer right away. Her silence wasn't hesitation, it was precision. If there is, she said, they think they're ahead of you. Crowley didn't ask who you was, he knew better. He looked at the man beside her. You working this with her? Her husband's reply was almost a breath, until it's done. Crowley stepped back from the table, as though making room for what he couldn't control. Then, I'll give you access to what you need and stay out of your way. That was as close to trust as the general could speak out loud. Sarah took the dossier from the edge of the table without asking. The room darkened as the map minimized into the corner of the screen. Crowley studied her for a long second, the way a man looks at a storm he can't stop, only prepare for. You didn't tell them everything last time, he said quietly. There was no point, she replied. And now? She met his eyes. Now they're not the only ones in danger of forgetting the cost. He said nothing after that. The door opened without a sound when they left. Outside, whispers moved faster than footsteps, but no one stepped into their path. The air tasted like a warning. Back in the eastern corridor, the hum of servers blended with the low drone of distant engines. She didn't look left or right. Her husband matched her stride like they'd never unlearned it. They reached the restricted wing without being stopped. The guard posted there, a broad man with steady eyes, stepped aside even before she lifted the card. He didn't salute this time. He only nodded once like a man acknowledging gravity. The lights in the secure comms vault flickered when they entered. Tech stations lined the walls, but only one console was active. She went straight to it, pulling a chair forward with the hooked tip of her boot and sitting without settling. Her husband leaned against the wall, arms folded, gaze angled toward the ceiling as if listening to something the room couldn't hear. She slid the card into the encrypted slot. The interface unlocked with a deep internal click. No light show, no audio cue, just function acknowledging ownership. The system unfolded streams of sealed data, some sealed before half the analysts on base had enlisted. Transmission logs, aborted call signs, markers from the mission they pretended had ended the day she came home with blood on her shoes. Her fingers moved across the keys, not searching, retrieving. Behind her, the door opened. One pair of footsteps entered, measured, not hesitant. Colonel Vance. He didn't speak until he stood close enough to read the screens. That file's supposed to be archived dead, he said. It never was, she replied. Vance looked between her and the console. How far in? She didn't answer. The question was too small for what she was looking at. 7 layers deep in the data tree, something blinked. A compressed fragment containing flag codes and a timestamp matching the moment of sabotage during Dragon Eye. A ghost in the code, preserved by the arrogance of the one who left it there. She expanded the file. Her husband straightened off the wall. Vance leaned in, voice low. That can't be right. It is, she said. The fragment contained a calm signature, not the traitor they court-martialed, not the one who died in the field, someone who had never been named. Someone who was still active. Vance exhaled, a curse buried in the breath. "You're going to have to bring this forward." "No," she said, "not yet." He looked at her husband. "And you agree with that?" "I don't outrank the truth," he said simply. Vance ran a hand over his jaw. "You know what this means." Sarah closed the file and encrypted the path again. "It means someone thinks the past is still asleep." Vance shook his head once, like a man remembering a nightmare in daylight. "Crowley's going to want a name." "He'll get one," she said, "when it's time." Vance didn't argue. He'd seen enough to know timing sometimes outweighed rank. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and spoke without looking back. "Half this base still believes what they saw at the gate, the other half scared of what they didn't." Her husband watched him go. When the door sealed, the silence returned. Sarah removed the card, slid it back into place on her jacket, and stood. "We'll need access beyond the base," she said. He nodded once. "You're thinking offshore." "And encrypted banks, old transmission corridors, dead contractors." He cracked half a smile. "So the usual." She didn't smile back, but something in her eyes shifted, an old fire flickering to life. They left the vault together. Outside, the hallway carried the same quiet tension, but now it bent around them instead of resisting. At the far end of the corridor, a young warrant officer stared too long before quickly pretending not to. He wasn't mocking her. He was afraid of being seen by her. She and her husband walked past him without a glance. Beyond the windows, storm clouds gathered over the hills where Fort Crestwood hid its history. The air felt like metal before impact. She didn't look at the sky. There were still things she hadn't told them. And the time for silence was running out. Why did the ground always go quiet before the past rose back up? The corridors behind them hummed with a restrained kind of panic, the kind people tried to hide under routine. But routine couldn't disguise the shift in posture when she passed, or the way conversations clipped themselves mid-sentence before she got close enough to hear. She and her husband exited the secure wing and crossed the central atrium, where soldiers moved like currents avoiding collision. A pair of intel officers carrying files veered left the moment they saw her, as if the air around her rewrote their path. She didn't acknowledge any of them. Her focus was ahead, toward a meeting she hadn't been summoned to, but one she knew had already begun without the right eyes in the room. The Strategic Intelligence Hub was located in the upper west quadrant of the base, 4 floors up, past the comm divisions and tactical testing offices. Her boots struck each stair with the same measured rhythm, unhurried but inevitable. Her husband walked half a step behind, his silence camouflaged as instinct. On the third-floor landing, 2 Marines rounded the corner and nearly collided with them. One muttered an apology, but their eyes fell to the black card before lifting to her face. Their posture straightened without order. The taller of the two, a lance corporal with a nervous jaw, watched her walk past like someone witnessing a classified secret in motion. At the double doors to the Intel hub, 2 MPs guarded the entrance. They stepped forward automatically, but paused when the retinal scanner above the door lit up on its own. Her card hadn't even left her jacket. The lock disengaged. The MP stepped aside. Inside, the room was alive with screens and hushed urgency. A wall-sized display showed satellite overlays, blinking tags, and nodal threads of scrambled data trailing off eastern coastlines. Conversations died by instinct when she entered. Not out of respect, out of the sudden awareness that assumptions had consequences now. Colonel Vance was already there, along with a half-dozen intelligence officers and 2 civilian advisors whose suits looked too smooth to trust. The Secretary of Defense was not present, but his authority lingered in every clipped sentence. Vance didn't look surprised to see her. "We're about to brief command," he said. "You're early." Her husband stepped to the side, hands in his pockets, gaze drifting across the room like a silent measure of threat. Sarah moved toward the central display, eyes scanning the map. Which sector triggered the alert? A civilian advisor, thin, graying, wearing glasses that made him seem less intrusive than he was, responded automatically. Sector 19G civilian bandwidth detected encrypted pings near dormant maritime channels. And you think it's external, she said, not asking. The man hesitated. It's our working theory. Sarah looked at him, with the kind of silence that dismantled theories. Working theories get people killed, she said evenly. Vance's lips twitched, almost a tired smirk. Show her the flagged waveforms, Mayers. Mayers, the advisor, motioned to an analyst seated 3 terminals down. A trembling hand pulled up compressed sequences of audioless signals, a rhythmic scatter of numbers and dead air. The analyst glanced nervously at Sarah as she leaned in. It repeats every 19 hours, the analyst said, but the encoding is partial, fragmented like something trying not to fully wake up. Or trying not to be heard, she replied. Her husband's voice came low from behind her. Looks like a handshake message, backdoor signal. Mayers folded his arms. It could also be an unrelated remnant, collision data, maritime spillover. It isn't, Sarah and her husband said at the same time. The room breathed differently after that. Vance stepped closer to the main screen. We pulled logs from the last 48 hours. 3 anomalous queries were flagged on our own network. Access levels suggest internal vetting to bury them. A younger intelligence officer spoke up, uncertainty betraying his age. We traced one of the masked attempts to a workstation in Logistics Command. The credentials belonged to a Captain Denning. Denning in medical leave, another officer said. He hasn't touched a console in weeks. Sarah rested her hand on the edge of the table. Then someone borrowed his skin. Her husband unfolded his arms, stepping forward. You running internal sweeps. Vance shook his head once. Can't. If we do it formally, the wrong person gets alerted and bolts. Sarah didn't look at Vance when she spoke next. How many entrances to level 6 unrestricted? 4, Vance said. 7 if you count override tunnels. Count them, she said. He nodded, already moving to relay orders to his ops chief. From the far end of the room, a voice spoke for the first time. You think someone here is communicating with them? Not a question, an argument disguised as disbelief. Sarah turned her head just enough to see who spoke, a Navy intelligence officer with too much rank and too little knowledge of what silence could hide. He didn't flinch under her gaze, but he wanted to. They're not communicating, she said. They're receiving. Mayers scoffed lightly before he caught himself. You're suggesting active collaboration on domestic ground. Sarah took one step toward him, not threatening but absolute. I'm not suggesting anything, she said. I'm telling you infiltration doesn't always look like invasion. Sometimes it looks like laziness, or arrogance, or a name nobody questioned because they recognized the uniform. The room stilled. Mayer's jaw moved, but no words came. A loud tone from the comm wall broke the silence. The central console illuminated with a security transmission prompt. Command calling for live updates. The analyst at position 2 said, eyes wide. Vance nodded once, patch it through. The main screen went black, then flickered to life with a secure channel emblem before revealing General Crowley's face. The man looked more tired than before, his presence feeling too large for the screen. Crowley's gaze scanned the room until landing on Sarah. I assume you're already ahead of the briefing packet. Sarah didn't nod, she didn't need to. Crowley continued, you'll head the internal trace, Vance will assist. Mayers looked like he wanted to object. He stayed silent. Crowley then looked at her husband. And you're authorized for parallel ops, full clearance reinstated. A ripple went through the room, confusion mixed with alarm, but no one dared speak. And Mitchell, Crowley said, voice quieting, if this goes where I think it will, you don't wait for permission to act. The transmission cut. The room exhaled like something heavy had just been set on the floor. Sarah turned back toward the screen displaying the waveforms. Her eyes moved as if reading ghosts. "We start in logistics," she said, "and we don't announce it." Vance was already pulling access bands from a secure drawer. "Team of 4. "No," she said, "team of 2. Vance paused. "You and—" She looked at her husband. He was already putting on the wristband before the sentence formed. They left the intel hub without further words. The MPs at the door shifted posture as if the hallway had suddenly become classified. Down the stairwell the air grew cooler, concrete replacing polished flooring, sound tightening into echo. The lower west sector housed logistics command, storage bays, digital inventory systems, requisition terminals. The place where quiet sabotage could nest behind paperwork and chain of command. They crossed the final checkpoint without stopping. Sarah's card bypassed the scanner before the guard finished asking for ID. Inside, the logistics floor was quieter than the upper wings. Rows of terminals stretched across an open space. Crates stacked along the far wall bore faded unit stamps and serial tags. A captain at one of the consoles glanced up, confusion trying to mask itself as annoyance. "This area's restricted to clearance, level TH." She was in front of him before he could finish, her eyes flicking to his badge. "Captain Owens. You processed requisitions under Denning's credentials in the last 72 hours, she said flatly. Owens' pupils constricted. "That's incorrect. I was authorized temporary." Her husband moved behind him, blocking his only path backward. Sarah leaned closer, not threatening, dissecting. "What did they offer you?" she asked. Owens' breath stuttered. "I don't know what you're—" She reached past him and tapped the terminal. The screen lit to a masked log entry with Denning's name attached, time-stamped at 2:30. Owens' hands curled against the edge of the desk. A bead of sweat slid near his ear. "You didn't write the code," she said. "You just let them sit at your terminal." His shoulders stiffened. "I didn't." "You knew enough not to ask who they were," her husband said quietly. Owens' lips parted around a half-formed denial, but the sound died as footsteps approached from the corridor behind them. A second officer entered, female, mid-30s, hair pulled too tight. The nameplate read L. Renner. She froze when she saw Sarah. The fear in Renner's face wasn't the fear of someone caught off guard, it was older, familiar. Sarah stepped aside from Owens, turning slowly to face the woman. Renner's throat worked before she spoke. "I didn't bring them in, I just opened the door." Her husband's gaze sharpened. "Who?" Renner swallowed. "I never saw a face, just the badge. They wore Denning's uniform." Denning's uniform. Denning, who hadn't stepped foot on base in over a month. Sarah studied her, not with pity, not with fury, just clarity. "Where did they go after this room?" Renner pointed to the southern exit. "Archive sublevel. They went through the lower passage access. I didn't follow." Sarah didn't look at Owens again. She simply said, "You'll both be contained until we finish this." Neither protested. Survival kept them still. She and her husband moved to the southern door. No lights waited there, only a stairwell descending into concrete and shadow. Her husband glanced at her, the unspoken weighing the space between them. She touched the edge of the card with 2 fingers. They thought no one would come looking down here. The stairwell swallowed their footsteps. The air changed the further they descended, older, denser, colder. Pipes ran along the ceiling, humming faintly. The walls were unpainted cement, sweat-stained from decades of recycled heat. At the landing, a steel door stood unguarded, half-lit by a flickering bulb. Someone had overridden the lock recently. She pressed the card to the reader. The panel hesitated, then clicked open. Beyond the door, a long, narrow service tunnel extended into shadowed distance, lit only by intermittent strips of dying light. She stepped inside first. Her husband followed without a word. Somewhere in the dark ahead, footsteps had already come and gone. Someone had walked this hallway in a stolen name. And they were still here. Waiting. Why did the darkest hallways always carry the clearest memories? The tunnel air was still, stale in the way sealed places breathe when no one is meant to walk them. Concrete walls stretched ahead, rough and sweating faintly under the failing strips of light fixed to the ceiling. Each flicker carved moving shadows across the floor, like the dark itself hadn't decided who could walk its length. Sarah moved without hesitation, her boots soundless against the ground, each step measured, each breath drawn like it might have to last longer than a moment should. Her husband walked half a pace behind, not guarding her, not guiding, matching a rhythm the world had tried and failed to erase from them. The deeper they went, the stronger the sense of something unfinished crept in. The air cooled, and the hum of the bass above grew distant, replaced by a silence that remembered more than the living did. Halfway down the tunnel, a rusted access panel lay pried open, its screws scattered like teeth nearby. Wires hung loose inside, severed with precision. Not chaos, intent. She crouched near it, fingers brushing the edge of the metal where it had been forced. The tool marks were narrow and neat, someone trained, not desperate. No fingerprints. No dust disturbed outside the panel. Whoever did it knew how to leave nothing. He looked down the hall, eyes tracking the edges where darkness stayed longer than the light allowed. They came with time, not panic. They knew where this led, she said, standing. Ahead, the tunnel split into two narrow veins. One sloped down toward old archive access. The other curved toward a secondary maintenance channel that hadn't been logged active in years. She didn't pause to decide. Her body knew before thought lined up. She turned left down the sloped path. The floor leveled after 20 meters. A heavy steel door stood at the end, its keypad dark, screen cracked, as if someone achieved access without using it the way it was built for. She pressed her palm against the panel. The metal was colder than the air. She removed her hand and slid the black card halfway from her jacket. The strip of light above glinted softly off the emblem. Her husband stepped closer, not crowding her, just near enough that the silence between them was part of the ground. "If they're still inside," he said. "They won't run," she finished. She slid the card fully into the bypass slot. There was no beep, no tone, just the quiet thud of the lock retracting. The door opened with a low groan, heavy hinges unused for too long. She stepped through without breaking stride. The archive level beyond the door was dark. No active screens, no overhead lights, just ambient glow leaking from old power conduits along the ceiling, enough to paint the outlines of dead terminals and sealed storage bays. Her footsteps didn't echo here. The air absorbed sound. She scanned the space without turning her head. Every row of sealed crates, every dormant interface, every vent where breath might hide. She could feel him behind her, silent in the way only someone who'd survived the same ghosts could be. They moved in deeper. 3 rows in, a console glowed faintly. Not full power, just a soft standby light pulsing at intervals. It shouldn't have been active. Archive terminals required manual clearance from 2 ranks above hers, unless someone had disarmed the restrictions before the protocol was rewritten. She approached the screen. It flickered when her shadow crossed it, then steadied like something recognizing its own predator. Lines of code scrolled once, then stopped. A single access log remained open on the display, time-stamped 2 hours earlier. Not erased, not hidden, left open like a message. She didn't touch the keyboard. Her husband angled himself toward the far bay, scanning the darker ends of the level. His footsteps paused near one of the sealed doors. "The lock was reset," he said. She looked back to the console, eyes tracing the digital residue of the open log. There was no attached user identification, but she saw the tag embedded in the metadata, an alphanumeric fragment no one else alive would have recognized. She had seen it before. She had buried it before. In the mission, nobody wrote the truth about. She heard the shift of air before the whisper of movement registered. Someone was in the room. She didn't turn. Her right hand hung loose at her side, not tensed, but ready in the way breath is ready before speech. His voice carried not alarm but certainty. Behind us. She still didn't turn, left or right. Left. She pivoted without haste, but not slow. Just enough for her eyes to catch the figure standing between two silent storage racks. A silhouette, no weapon visible, stands calm, face half-lit by the dying conduit above. Not a stranger. A memory. Her eyes didn't widen, her breath didn't catch, but some part of the past stepped through her ribs. He was older, lines around his mouth, hair more steel than sand, but his posture hadn't changed. The posture of someone who never feared being seen, because he never expected to be held accountable. She didn't speak his name. He didn't look at her husband. His gaze stayed on her like time had never passed between the last moment and this one. "You weren't supposed to make it out of Dragon Eye," he said quietly. Silence folded around his words like cloth. "Neither were you," she said. His lips tilted, not a smile, not regret, something between acknowledgement and defiance. "You should have stayed gone." "You should have stayed dead," she replied. Her husband shifted his stance just slightly, but the man didn't react. His attention was locked on the one person who'd seen him bleed and survive it. "There are things you don't understand," he said. "There were," she corrected, "not anymore." His eyes flickered to the card on her jacket, then to the console she'd stood over. "They didn't tell you everything," he said. "They never do," she said, "but I don't need their version." She took a step forward. He mirrored it with a backward one, not fear, calculation. "You followed the signal," she said. "I placed it." Of course he did. His arrogance had always been clean, precise, never messy like panic. Her husband spoke then, his voice a shadow of old judgment. "How many are left?" The man's eyes finally slid to him, recognition deep and unhidden. "Fewer than you think, more than she knows." Sarah didn't blink. "You sent someone through Denning's login." "I sent no one, I am no one, that's why I'm still breathing." She absorbed that without reaction. She didn't step closer, didn't retreat. "You're not working alone," she said. He tilted his head. "Neither are you." The conduit light above them flickered. His face disappeared into shadow for half a breath, then returned. "You're not here to stop what comes next," he said. "You're here because someone remembered too late." "And you're here," she said, "because someone forgot to finish you." His expression shifted then, not surprise, not anger, something like weary clarity. "You still think this is about betrayal?" "It always was." He shook his head once. "You think I sabotaged Dragon Eye because I was bought. I sabotaged it because we were already dead before we hit the ground. You were just the only one too stubborn to die on schedule." Her jaw tightened, but only slightly. The memory of radio static, sand choking the night, men who were alive one moment and gone the next, the timing that never made sense, the silence on the evac channel. He watched her face like he wanted to see the old ghost surface. "They sent us there knowing what waited," he said. "We didn't lose that mission." He took one step forward. Her husband didn't move, but the air behind him changed. "We were offered up," he said. "You betrayed us," she answered. "I bought us time," he said. "For who?" she asked. "For whoever made sure the rest of that intel got where it needed to go." She studied him, really saw him now. Not as the traitor they listed in sealed files, not as the ghost she buried in blame, but as a fracture inside the story she'd been handed. He lowered his voice. "The ones pulling those strings aren't ghosts. They're still in the room upstairs. You think file fragments and old accounts were the whole truth." She didn't respond. Her silence was an answer to questions he hadn't asked yet. He looked at the console again. "You opened the wrong door first. You always did." Her husband stepped forward then, not a threat, just a boundary. "If you had answers, you wouldn't still be hiding in tunnels." The man turned to him, and for the first time there was something like loss in his eyes. "You think I'm hiding," he said. "I'm surviving the people waiting for you to leave this room." Sarah's hand lowered to her side again, fingers brushing the fabric near the card. "You walked back into the place that tried to erase you," she said. "Why?" He held her gaze, and the weight of 20 buried truths passed through the space between them. "Because the ones who sent us to die are still giving orders," he said softly, "and you're about to follow one." The light above flickered again and went out. The room submerged into low shadow, leaving only the faint blue of the terminal glow. When the emergency strip lights crackled on along the floor, he was already stepping backward into the dark. Her husband moved to follow, but she raised a hand slightly, not to stop him, just to let the silence decide. The man's voice drifted from the shadows, quieter now. "You want to stop the signal. Find the person who approved the mission that killed our team." Her eyes didn't waver. "I know who signed the order." He took one last breath she couldn't see. "You know the name, not the reason." Then he was gone, swallowed by the corridor beyond the storage racks, into some passage she hadn't seen yet. She didn't chase him. Not yet. Her husband spoke low. "You believe him." "I don't have to believe him," she said. "I just have to know why he's still alive." She turned back to the console, extracting the data key from the terminal without leaving a trace on the screen. The metadata fragment she'd seen was already locked into the encrypted path on her card. She walked back toward the exit. Her husband glanced once down the dark where the man had vanished, then followed her out. The steel door sealed behind them with the same heavy certainty it opened with. Up the stairs the air shifted warmer, the overhead lights returned, the hum of the bass above resumed its pulse. But something new moved inside the ground beneath it now, a truth that had refused to stay dead. In the corridor above the second landing, the first voice she'd hear wouldn't be an apology or a warning. It would be a lie. And she already knew who would speak it. She just hadn't decided yet how much of it she'd let them finish. Why did the truth always climb the stairs slower than the lie waiting at the top? The tunnel door sealed behind them with the quiet finality of a held breath. As Sarah and her husband ascended into the warmer corridors of the base, the silence between them wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. Every step carried the residue of something unfinished, something they'd buried not because it was gone, but because it still breathed in the dark. The stairwell ended at a reinforced checkpoint leading back into the logistics quadrant. The guard stationed there straightened instinctively when they approached, his hand hovering near the console. "Ma'am, clearance code?" he asked, trying not to look nervous. She didn't slow. She pulled the black card halfway into view. The panel lit up before she even reached the threshold, scanning whatever protocols had been rewritten to accommodate her return. The guard exhaled as the lock disengaged. He didn't ask where they'd come from. Some men didn't want to know which doors weren't meant to open. They stepped back into the main hallway. The hum of overhead lights and distant machinery returned, like the world above had no idea the past was moving under its feet. Her husband spoke only when they were clear of the checkpoint. "They'll know someone accessed the archive." "They'll know someone tried," she corrected. "And when they check the logs, there won't be any." She paused at the junction where the hall split toward intel and the upper comm levels. "But someone up there is already waiting to ask the wrong questions." "And give the wrong answers," he said. They walked without speaking the rest of the way. At the entrance to the intel hub, 2 different MPs now stood guard, faces she didn't recognize. They stepped aside the moment the system acknowledged her approach. The door unlocked with a sharp magnetic pulse. Inside, light and noise collided, monitors glowing, analysts hunched over screens, coded updates rotating across displays. The tension was thicker now, not panic, containment. Colonel Vance turned when he saw her, his brow tightened by a fraction. Report. She didn't bother moving closer before speaking. The breach wasn't external. The signal was placed by someone with prior access to Dragon Eye intelligence. Mayers, the civilian advisor, was standing near the comm table, pretending to review data. His eyes lifted sharply. That's a broad assumption. She looked at him without blinking. It's a fact with an unfinished name. One of the junior analysts looked between them with the brittle stillness of someone, suddenly aware they were in the wrong room at the right time. Vance crossed his arms. Identify who? She held his gaze. I will. Mayer stepped forward, irritation creeping through his attempt at poise. You went down there without authorization for what? Intuition. You're chasing the ghost of an op that got half your people killed. Her husband angled his stance slightly, but she didn't turn to him. She looked at Mayers as though measuring how long it would take him to stop speaking if truth ever touched his spine. You're half right, she said quietly. It didn't get half my people killed, it got all of them. The room didn't breathe after that. Even the screen seemed to quiet. She walked past Mayers and stopped at the central display. The satellite feed of Sector 19G still rotated, pale blue threads running along maritime channels like veins under tired skin. Vance tracked her movements with narrowed eyes. You recognize something? Yes. He waited, but she didn't elaborate. Mayers made a sound halfway between scoff and disbelief. So we're chasing classified ghosts now. Are we supposed to lock down the base because a rumor followed you up a flight of stairs? Her husband turned his head slowly toward the man. The look he gave wasn't anger. It was warning shaped like patience running out. Vance's voice cut through before anything frayed. You said someone from Dragon Eye survived. She didn't hesitate. One of them. That's impossible, Mayers interjected. All confirmed KIA, black filed, debrief sealed. She met his eyes. You read the version they left you. Vance leaned on the edge of the table. If he's alive. He's been here before, she said, and he didn't come alone. Vance didn't curse, didn't blink, but his hand closed over his wrist like he was stopping his pulse from overreaching. Name, he said. She didn't give it, not yet. Mayers spread his hands in frustration. So now we're protecting a traitor. No, she said, we're exposing one. A deep voice from the far end of the room spoke before Mayers could respond. Whose side is he on? It was the Navy intel officer from earlier, the one who had doubted her with restrained disdain. His face wasn't arrogant now, just unsettled. He's on the side that didn't finish the job, she said. And what side is that? Mayers asked. She looked at him, and something in her eyes disassembled his certainty. The side that survives long enough to flip the board, she said. Her husband stepped to the tactical map and traced the southern line of the coast with one finger. If the signal wasn't to activate something, but to confirm silence, then someone here is waiting for a response before moving. Vance absorbed that, then looked at Sarah. And Dragon Eye. Wasn't a failure, she said. It was a filter. Mayers blinked. A filter for what? She glanced at the comm feeds tracking scrambled channels. For who could be erased without leaving a ripple? The analyst at position 2 hesitated, then cleared his throat gently. Sir, Colonel, we've got a flagged internal alert from Washington. Secure chain request from Defense Subcommittee. Vance didn't move his gaze from Sarah. Who requested it? The analyst checked twice before answering. Senator Ashford. The name slid into the air like a weapon drawn under a table. Mayers exhaled with visible relief. Finally, someone with actual authority stepping in. Her husband cut him off without raising his voice. "You think that's a rescue?" Mayers frowned. "It's oversight, you can't ignore them." Sarah didn't break her stare from the display, but her words found their mark. He was on the clearance list for Dragon Eye. The junior analyst looked up sharply. Vance's expression hardened a degree he rarely showed. Mayer's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That was over a decade ago. Irrelevant." "Then why is he calling now?" her husband said. The analyst at position 2 spoke again, more quietly. "Request is directed to her." For the first time since entering the room, she blinked. Vance stepped closer. He asked for her specifically. "Yes, sir," the analyst said. "Private secure line, 5-minute window." Mayers held his hands out. "Then take it. If there's a chain of command, we follow it. Even she doesn't outrank the subcommittee." Sarah didn't look at him. She turned instead toward the secure comm room adjacent to the main hub. Vance moved to follow, but she raised 2 fingers slightly. He stopped, not because of rank, because he trusted the silence more than the noise. Her husband walked with her down the short corridor to the reinforced glass-walled comm chamber. The door sealed behind them with a sound only old secrets made. The console flashed, awaiting connection. She didn't sit. The screen lit up with no feed, no face, only a modulated voice inside blackout encryption. "Colonel Mitchell," the voice said, calm, familiar, "it's been some time." She didn't respond. "You opened an unauthorized archive door," the voice continued. "That suggests you found something." She watched the blank screen as though it were a mirror. "You're not calling to ask what I found," she said. A faint pause. "No." Her husband stood with his back to the far wall, arms crossed loosely, jaw set in silent condemnation. The voice resumed. "Whatever you think you saw tonight, you're going to let it go." She didn't move. The voice deepened. "There are decisions above your pay grade, and above mine. You were brought back because you know when to stand down." Her eyes didn't change. "I wasn't brought back." That pause again, longer this time. "You think the secretary reinstated you because of merit?" the voice asked. "He did it because someone asked for you, and that someone isn't me." Her breath slid quiet between her teeth. "You were never supposed to cross paths with what's buried beneath this base," the voice said. "That part of the world is closed." "You closed it," she said. "For good reason," he replied, "and you're going to close it again." Her husband shifted slightly off the wall, not speaking, not intervening, just listening to the sound of a blade being unsheathed through words. The voice went on. "The man you think you saw is dead, officially and otherwise. If you pursue him, you will force us to correct that record." She leaned in a fraction, not forward but inward. "You think I take orders from the people who wrote that record?" "You take orders from the flag you still wear when no one's looking," he said. She let silence answer. The voice flattened. "This ends tonight." Then the screen went black. She stood there, long after the display powered down. Her husband didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. She finally turned. "They're not afraid he's alive." "No," he said, "they're afraid of why." She opened the chamber door and walked back into the intel hub. Eyes turned to her, but she didn't slow. Vance stepped forward. "What did he say?" She didn't answer him, not yet. She stopped at the central table and placed her black card down, hard enough for the sound to cut through the room. Mayers flinched. She looked at Vance first, then the analyst, then the Navy intel officer, then finally at Mayers. "They think Dragon Eye stayed buried because they wrote the ending," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't have to be. "But they forgot something." Mayers swallowed. "What?" She held his gaze. "The dead don't file reports." The room absorbed that sentence like it wouldn't let it go. Before anyone could respond, an alarm tone split through the comms, sharp, piercing, insisting immediate attention. The analyst at Position 1 looked up, eyes wide. "Colonel, we just got a Level 3 breach alert." Vance's head snapped to the screen. "Location." The analyst's hands flew across his keyboard. "Secure sublevel, logistics access corridor, 2 signatures." Her husband turned to her, already knowing. "They're not running," he said. "No," she said, "they're inviting." Vance looked at her. "You want to take a team?" She was already walking toward the exit. "No team." Her husband followed. Vance didn't try to stop him. Mayers called after them. "You're walking into a trap." She didn't turn around. She just said, "So are they." They left the room in silence that felt like a countdown. As the door sealed behind them, the hum of operations resumed, but nothing sounded the same anymore. Some deaths echo longer than breath, and some orders were never meant to be followed. Why do some endings feel less like closure and more like a door someone forgot to lock? They moved through the corridor like the walls were listening. The overhead lights shifted tone the deeper they went, from stark fluorescence to the low, humming amber used in restricted wings. Her steps were steady, deliberate. His footsteps matched not by choreography but by history, the kind that doesn't need signals to align. They didn't speak as they passed the final security checkpoint. The guard on duty opened his mouth to question them, then shut it when the system flashed green at the sight of the black card. His eyes followed them like he knew something was wrong but not what to call it. The breach alert had come from the lower logistics access, way 1 level above the tunnel they'd just left. Whoever tripped it had done so openly. No scrambling, no masking, no erased trail. It wasn't panic. It was permission. The final hallway narrowed, its walls lined with old utility conduits and abandoned lockers from when the base had been half its size. Everything smelled faintly of oil and metal history. At the far end stood a reinforced maintenance door. It was slightly ajar. Her husband glanced once at the frame. No forced entry, no tool marks. Whoever entered had clearance. She pushed the door open with the back of her knuckles. Inside, the lighting was dim, just enough to see the room wasn't empty. 2 figures. One leaned against an equipment rack, arms crossed, posture like someone who'd been waiting long enough to lose interest in the clock. The other sat on a steel crate, elbows on knees, head lowered like she'd been listening to her own pulse. The man from the archive stepped into the shallow glow first. Same expression, same calm, no attempt to hide. The woman on the crate lifted her head slowly. Her face carried the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from years spent pretending memory wasn't a living thing. Sarah recognized her, not from the present but from a name buried deep in the mission briefing's dragon I had erased. Lieutenant Mara Cade, communications specialist, presumed KIA on extraction day. She hadn't died either. Sarah didn't blink, so there were 2 of you. Myra stood up from the crate. There were 4. Her husband's voice dropped quietly. "And the others?" The man answered. "One buried himself so deep they don't even remember printing his file. The 4th is Ash under a different name. He didn't get the luxury of staying erased." Sarah stepped further into the room. The door shut behind her with a dull, mechanical swallow. "You triggered the breach alert," she said. Mara shook her head. "We stopped hiding." The man pushed off the wall. "You weren't supposed to be the one they sent, but when they did, it meant everything up there is closer to cracking than they admit." "They," Sarah repeated softly. "You've had over 10 years to define that word." Mara's eyes flicked to the door, then to Sarah. "You think we don't want to name them? We did, for years, but every time we traced the wire back, the hand changed. The signature moved. The trail ended in rooms where loyalty was a uniform with no country stitched to it." Her husband moved to Sarah's side but not in front of her. You sabotaged us. Mara didn't flinch. We redirected what was already set to burn you. Sarah's fingers rested near the edge of the black card. You think that distinction matters to the people we buried. The man spoke again. You think we don't carry them with us. You think breathing felt like victory when half our blood was on the sand and the radio went silent for reasons you weren't told. She took one step toward him. You broke comms. He didn't deny it. I broke a channel that was feeding the kill order straight to the men on the ridge you never saw. Mara's voice lowered. And you were meant to die in the wave that followed, clean, contained, file closed. Silence held steady. He looked at Sarah then. You want to know why I'm still alive? Because the same man who erased Dragon Eye needed someone off record to sweep up the pieces he couldn't publicly burn. And now, she asked. He exhaled. Now that someone is running out of fire. Sarah's gaze didn't leave his face. Who signed the order? He raised one corner of his mouth, not a smile. You already spoke to him tonight. Mara added, you weren't supposed to hear the threat in his voice. You were supposed to take it as instruction. Her husband spoke to her without looking at either of them. Ashford. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. Mara stepped closer, hands not raised in peace or warning, just open. There's a reason he wanted Dragon Eye forgotten. There's a reason he wants you silenced now. We didn't come back for absolution. We came back because we can't get to the door he's hiding behind. The man nodded slightly toward the card in Sarah's jacket. But you can. Her eyes narrowed. So this was about forcing my hand. Mara didn't retreat. No, this was about giving you a choice they were about to take away. He watched Sarah with the stillness of someone who'd made peace with being hated. You don't owe us anything, but the people who sent us there are still drawing maps with other people's blood. You were the only one who didn't die when the world was done with us. That means something to them. It means something to me, she said quietly. He almost laughed, but not from humor. You think dignity doesn't leave a trail. You've been casting a shadow over their plans since the day you crawled out of that crater. You just didn't know where the shadow was coming from. A low creak sounded from the ductwork above them, old metal expanding, or new ears listening. Her husband caught it too. His eyes rose briefly, then returned to the room. Sarah looked at both of them. You expect me to protect you. He shook his head. We expect you to decide whether finishing us brings you closer or further from the truth. That's it. We're done running, Mara said. If you hand us over, do it clean. Sarah studied the floor between them for one breath, then looked up. You'll stay out of sight until I decide how to use you, she said. Neither protested, neither looked relieved. He spoke without ceremony. Sublevel generator alcove, west wing. No cameras, just radio dead zones and old steel. We'll wait until you come or until they do. Mara gave Sarah one final look, the kind that spoke of debts unpaid and graves without markers. Then she followed him through a side maintenance hatch almost invisible under dust and rivets. The door sealed with a sound too soft for the room they left behind. Her husband watched the empty space a moment longer. You trust them, he said. No, she said. I trust what wants them gone. They left the room, stepping back into the corridor where the hum of clean walls tried to swallow what the base didn't want to remember. As they neared the stairwell, Vance's voice came through the comm clip to her shoulder. Mitchell Sitrep. She tapped the channel but didn't stop walking. False breach, no hostiles. His response was quick. You're certain. No shots fired, but your problem isn't down here. A pause, understood. There's something you need to see upstairs. Secure ops, she asked. Conference wing, command level feed, and Mitchell, his voice lowered for the first time since she returned to the base. It's about Dragon Eye. She closed the channel and kept walking. By the time they reached the elevator that accessed the upper floors, The night outside the base had shifted, winds changing direction, as if the air itself were reconsidering what it carried. Inside the command conference wing, the lights were dimmed except for the central war room display. The space was empty except for Vance and two senior intel officers reviewing a paused video feed. He didn't waste time with preamble. This arrived from a private channel 10 minutes ago, encrypted, no source ID. Sarah stepped up to the display. The video showed a satellite view, grainy but precise, of a desert extraction zone she'd never forgotten. The wreckage of the transport, the dark bloom of smoke, bodies not yet recovered. The camera panned to a ridge overlooking the site. Figures were visible, armed, stationed, waiting. One of the intel officers spoke quietly. This wasn't in any report. Vance looked at her. Whoever filmed this had clearance higher than any field unit. Her husband folded his arms. They were watching us die. Sarah didn't speak. The screen showed the ridge going up in flames seconds later, a detonation too clean to be insurgent work. The feed cut before the smoke cleared. Vance exhaled through his nose. Somebody kept a record. Sarah finally spoke. Somebody kept insurance. Vance nodded slowly, and someone else is trying to cash it. Before anyone could say more, the intercom crackled to life with a tone reserved for executive command. All senior leadership report to briefing chamber 1, immediate session, level black. Vance glanced at Sarah, then at her husband. That's Ashford. He didn't need to say the rest. She was already walking toward the chamber. The room was large, circular, built for the kind of power that preferred shadows over signatures. A dozen high-backed seats lined the table. Only 3 were occupied when she arrived: Vance, a general she didn't know, and Senator Ashford himself, standing near the center as though hosting a lecture no one asked to attend. Ashford didn't look surprised to see her. That was always how men like him showed fear. He gave her a look so practiced it almost seemed kind. "Colonel Mitchell, I assume you've reviewed the situation thoroughly by now." She didn't sit. He clasped his hands behind his back. "Then you understand the importance of keeping certain events where they belong, in the past." She didn't blink. "You buried an op you orchestrated." Ashford tilted his head, voice still smooth. "I executed decisions to protect national assets." "You executed people," she said. The general beside him shifted uncomfortably. Ashford's mouth thinned. "Be careful, Colonel. You were reinstated for cooperation, not revisionist enthusiasm." Her husband took a step forward, but she spoke first. "You want Dragon I've forgotten because you signed off on a trade, intelligence for bodies, and you miscalculated who'd live long enough to remember." Ashford's eyes hardened. "You're speaking treason without evidence." She reached into her jacket and placed the encrypted data key on the table. "You lost control of the record." The general looked between them like he'd stumbled into the middle of a classified firestorm. Ashford didn't look at the key. "You think exposing this serves you. It implicates every name on that clearance roster, including those you still serve under." "I don't serve names," she said. "I serve the ones who didn't come home." For the first time, Ashford's voice lost its velvet. "You don't have the authority to decide what justice looks like." She stepped closer. "Neither do you anymore." Before his reply could sharpen, the chamber doors opened. 2 military legal officers stepped in, followed by the Secretary of Defense. Ashford straightened. "This is a secure discussion." The secretary didn't address him. He looked at Sarah first, then Vance, then the general. Then he looked at Ashford. "Senator," he said quietly, "you're being placed under executive detainment pending investigation into classified mission tampering and unauthorized covert directives." Ashford's face didn't move, but his eyes did, fast, sharp, searching for a shield that wasn't there. "This is absurd," he said. "You don't have clearance to." The secretary cut him off. You gave us clearance when you called her." The legal officers stepped forward. Ashford didn't resist, but the air around him trembled with the weight of a man who'd never prepared for the word consequence. As they led him out, he passed Sarah without looking at her. Or maybe he didn't look at her because he finally saw her. Vance approached slowly. "There will be fallout." She nodded once. "There always is." The secretary stopped before leaving the chamber. "What comes next will stay off record unless you choose otherwise." She didn't ask what choice he expected. He looked at the data key on the table. "We'll need your official statement." She met his eyes. "You'll get the truth." He held her gaze a moment longer, then left with the others. The chamber emptied, leaving only her and her husband. He spoke first. "You're not done." "No," she said, "they are." He glanced at the door Ashford had been taken through. "What about the others?" "They'll stay where they are until the floor stops shifting." And then she looked at the empty chairs around them. Each one once meant to seat someone who didn't have to answer for anything. "Then the dead will finally speak," she said quietly. They walked out together. No orders, no escort, no applause. Just the hallway breathing differently now that truth had been dragged into the light. And somewhere below, in abandoned steel and forgotten air, the ghosts of Dragon Eye waited for the world to catch up to the promise it had broken. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, threaten, or demand. Sometimes it just walks back into the room and refuses to stay erased.